Welcome, everyone. You are listening to the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com. And we are coming to you live from the 2016 PMI Global Congress in beautiful and sunny San Diego, California. And with me this morning here in the hallways of the conference center are two people. We have Kristy Neckowicz and Connie Inman. Hello, Kristy.
Hello.
Good morning. And unfortunately, I can't say hello, Connie, because I only have two microphones and Kristy's wearing it, but we will bring Connie into the mix in just a bit. So, your presentation is titled Recognize Warning Signs and Rescue Your Troubled Projects. Have you already given the presentation?
Not yet. We'll be giving the presentation this afternoon.
Oh, wonderful. You have an opportunity for a dry run right now.
Yes.
Excellent. Do you know how many people are going to be attending?
I do not.
Yeah. Okay.
I hope that it'll be well attended.
Have they moved you into a different room? That's always a good sign.
Oh, no, they haven't.
Okay. Yeah, if they move you into a different room, it means, there are a lot more people than we expect who are interested in this. All right. What is your interest in troubled projects? Why talk about them?
It's a good question. I saw Connie give the presentation on her case study back in the spring this year, and I thought to myself when I was sitting in the audience, I thought, we could do this together because we have a lot of similar experiences. We've been through a lot of trouble projects that, you could substitute the player's name, the company name, the product name, the technology name, and you might have the same problems. So I had this idea that we could give a presentation together and sharing our knowledge on problems that we've had with technology projects implementation or development projects, even business process improvement projects, because I walked away from that case study presentation from Connie thinking, geez, a lot of the problems are very similar. They're related to not doing the right risk management, not doing the right level of stakeholder analysis or management, and so forth. So I said, wow, these are really universal lessons to be learned. So that's why we created this paper together to talk about our experience with troubled projects, how we rescue them, and we hope that people will walk away with a good idea for how to fix their troubled projects.
Talking about troubled projects takes you out of your comfort zone because you have to admit that I failed. How do you feel about that? Why do we not do this more? Because lessons learned of something that failed are so important.
That's really a good question because I thought of that also, that, I'm used to teaching people how to do things, like how to calculate earned value, how to do scheduling, how to do portfolio management, how to do, do the right thing so you're communicating with different behavior styles, etc. But I never really talked about my own lessons about things that we did wrong that we had to rescue. So it is uncomfortable. But on the other hand, I think if people could just suspend that fear or that judgment of, that happened to you won't happen to me type of thing, if they could just be open-minded, they're going to learn so much. So I think this is a good presentation, for people to talk to discuss with us after they hear it, to talk about things that they're walking away with, because I really do think it's universal.
Okay. Can you give us a definition of what a troubled project is?
A troubled project, it's interesting, Connie and I talked about this earlier. It may not just be that you've completed the project or the project is going on schedule and on budget, but you also have to make sure that you have the end in mind. So a troubled project, the way we see it, is any project that is not going to deliver the intended value or, not perform to scope on budget and on time. Mm-hmm. So any of those.
Right. You actually have a sentence in your paper. We propose that a troubled project is one that, although has not been terminated, has significantly missed its defined scope, budget, and or schedule to a point of perceived no return. The interesting thing I find about this is that the third last word, perceived no return. So what is the difference between no return and perceived no return here?
That's also an interesting point that you brought up. The perceived, the perception piece is that even if the project team felt good about the state of the project or that they could turn things around, the stakeholders, either the users or the sponsors, are so disappointed that they've already written you off. They've already said, well, that's fine, you go ahead and finish it, but we're not going to use it. Or, they're resigned to the idea that the project is not going to succeed in their mind.
Okay.
So that's the key word there, perceived.
Okay. When does trouble usually begin to occur in the projects?
I think we're getting into the case study, so I would like to hand this over to Connie so she can talk about it.
Thank you, Kristy.
All right. Now that we've made the switch over to Connie. Hi, Connie. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. We're excited to be talking to you today. Thank you.
So when in the life cycle of a project does trouble usually begin to occur?
Trouble can begin at any phase of your project. What you have to start doing is figuring out how to recognize that it has occurred. So that's the point of our case studies here is it can occur from the very first day. If you've got a lot of requirements that you think you know about your scope and you've asked the right requirements you think, but you walk away and you don't confirm that you identified everything there was to do and either made the logical decision to say, that's out of scope, this is in scope, everybody agrees to it. When you walk away, you could have a trouble spot right there, right then at the beginning. You just don't recognize it until at the end when you're delivering and those perceptions come up of you didn't do this, you didn't do that, but I delivered exactly what you asked me to do, but I didn't deliver what you intended it to do. So it can occur at any point in the project.
All right. Next, we want to jump into 3 case studies. Tell us a little bit about these case studies. How did you find them, and why did you choose these 3 in particular, or sort of on a high level?
Excellent, excellent. We did, Kristy and I kind of went back and forth with the many things that we could talk about, and we chose these 3 in particular because one is about implementing software, one is about developing it, and then one is about the user experience of that implemented software.
So it's all about, it's not the same case study, right? It's 3 different and 3 different angles.
Exactly. Okay. So no matter where you are in the audience or in your project and what type of project it is, we're hoping that one of these types will resonate.
Okay. And all 3 are about software development. Is this interview still relevant for people who build roads and houses and engineering and things like that?
It absolutely is, because we don't go into the actual software development, the actual aspects of that. This is more about
the art of project management.
Exactly.
Okay, wonderful. Let's jump into case study number 1. You've titled it as a technology implementation project. Tell us a little bit about that.
So we were charged with the sponsor to purchase a software solution that would help with our project managers' scheduling. So we have a lot of project managers, but we needed a software solution outside of Excel or a Microsoft project on a one-off basis to come up with something that was more an enterprise solution. So that's what the scope of the project was to do. Okay,
what were the warning signs?
So going through the project, when we finally got to the point where we could recognize them, the stakeholder engagement. So they were not getting any different reports than they did the first time that they were getting out of Excel or other things. So the software was not providing any value to them. So then when you look past that, then you can see that the users are not using the software, and there's a lot of negative talk. So when the name of the software comes up, you get this grimace on the face,
people rolling their eyes,
a lot of bad chatter, those kind of things. And then it's just not effective as far as the objectives that were supposed to be as evidence that the maturity of the project managers would increase because of the software. And that was not the case either.
Okay.
So those were the kind of things that popped up.
The obvious question is, what did you do?
After we panicked and recovered from that, we broke it down into steps. And that's a lot of what Kristy and I came up with. A common theme, I guess, across all of them is that you have to step back, because that perception of no return, going back to that, is there's always a way. You just have to make sure that the communication, the relationships, that you're actually getting to the point that you engage people back into the project to say, okay, we realize that didn't work, but now you need your reports and you need a new software. So how can we do this? And we started looking at exactly what they do today. So from a technology standpoint, we're all used to our own email system, our own smartphone. We know how it works or whatever. And when you give us something new, it takes us a minute. So we wanted to take them from exactly what they do today to what they're going to do tomorrow in the software, in a step for step, or a like for like, if you will. So we don't add all the bells and whistles that we think are great. We just get them into the software first and then figure out, okay, now how do we increase their maturity? How do we increase the functionality of the tool? But let's back off and just get what they do today in the new tool. And when we did that, there's a quote, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So, and I think it's Zig Ziglar. But we needed to show that we cared about what they do, how they do it, and why that mattered.
Okay. What are the lessons learned that you have taken out of this case study?
So one is your stakeholder engagement. Figure out where you are in that risk analysis for your stakeholders and how engaged will they be. So when you're sitting down on your next project, and we came up with a worksheet that that we're going to provide the attendees at the session today, and kind of look at it from the perspective of, if they had a project in the past, if they have one currently going on or in the future, how would they apply these lessons learned? Or what other things did they come up with? But for us, it was, pay attention, communicate, reach out to them, and look at how engaged they are. Look at your reports. Are things happening the way that they should happen, as far as all the objectives of the project?
All right. So much for case study number 1. In just a second, we're going to switch back to Kristy for case study number 2 and 3. But let me ask you one thing. Mm-hmm. You said we a lot as we are reviewing the case study. So this was actually a project that you personally worked on?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Wonderful. And how much did it take out of you to having to admit, okay, this is failing. We have to do something?
It takes a minute, because you just want to keep driving. You've got this objective. I know it'll work. Let me just get them to see that this will work. But after a minute, you have to step back and realize you're not the one going to be using it. So if it's them to use it, them need to be involved. And so it takes a minute, but you can't, as a project manager, you're just driving anyway. You're not really the user. You're not the sponsor. You're just the enabler to make sure that the project gets done. So take that pride element out of it, step back and say, okay, this is about them, not me. How do we make it work?
All right. Thank you. Now back over to Kristy. Back over to Kristy for the next case study.
Thank you.
And as we are switching headsets here, I'm starting to see and hear people approach in the background. So folks, this might get a little bit louder here in the background noise, but we are going to plow through this. Kristy, case study number 2, Agile Software Development Project. What was that about?
So Connie talked about implementing software products. So Connie talked about implementing a software solution. So we wanted to switch gears and talk about developing the software solution. So this is actually a project that I was personally involved in, and I was brought in to rescue the project. Mm-hmm. So this was a development team creating a program budgeting software product that would be commercially available. They originally developed for one customer, and it was to replace an Excel spreadsheet, much like Connie spoke about. So they had this complicated product that they were using in Excel, and they tried to commercialize this application. So it's the typical agile development process where the developers were iterating and showing their demoing their product every 2 weeks and getting a lot of customer feedback and implementing the changes as a result of the feedback. So it was all well and good in terms of the methodology.
And what were the warning signs?
So the warning signs were really that there was a lot of dissatisfaction.
Okay.
The users or the end customers thought they were expressing the requirements in the review meetings every couple of weeks, and the development team thought they were delivering the revisions as required, but it was actually a complete disaster. The sponsor and the stakeholders, I remember in a meeting where they actually yelled at the development team saying that what they delivered was unusable. So that was sort of a, smack in the face reaction of, as much as we didn't want to admit it, it was a failing project and it was never going to be done.
All right. And how did you right-size it?
So we ended up having to take a step back, much like Connie said about the first case study, and really did a stakeholder analysis for that project. Who really are the decision makers? Do we have to respond to everyone who is dissatisfied, or is one type of user more important than others as far as the product was concerned? So we did a lot of the stakeholder analysis, like who's responsible, who's accountable, who's only informed, and we found, for example, that people who were only supposed to be informed actually thought they were driving. And so, that's why they were very dissatisfied and they were very loud about the dissatisfaction. So once, we looked at that was a key thing that spelled out the roles and responsibilities for all the stakeholders. And that sort of, settled the pecking order, for lack of a better word, and made sure that we were actually responding to the right stakeholders when we were implementing changes. So the development team wasn't running ragged. We had a lot of turnover because the development team couldn't stand the constant change either. So it was, the stakeholder analysis actually was a linchpin in that.
Okay. And in regards to lessons learned, what did you take out of it?
Well, it was very similar to what Connie said earlier. The requirements is very important. And then also the fact that the stakeholders were speaking a different language than the developers. The development team thought they were practicing agile development. It's, what they're used to. And they just assumed that the stakeholders and the sponsors knew what that meant. But they really didn't know. They were really speaking different languages. The stakeholders were used to a waterfall approach, so they would express a need for a particular release by a particular date. And the development teams were thinking, okay, good, we'll work towards that. But, instead of a commitment. So there was a lot of dissatisfaction also related to the methodology itself. So we had to, one of the actions that we did to right-size it was to teach everybody what the methodology meant and what they can get out of it if they were to play by the rules, if you will. And we also adjusted our approaches a little bit so that we mix waterfall and agile in our approach.
All right, that means we're moving on to case study number 3, a business process improvement project. On a high level, what is this one all about?
This is about a large utility working with their engineering group to basically re-engineer their capital planning process. So they have this 5-year budgeting process that has been very manual, and they were getting information from a lot of different groups and different systems and manually doing this budgeting, this collaboration that's required. So they wanted to, instead of it taking 5 months out of the year to do this 5-year planning, they wanted to shorten the time.
And the warning signs? What did you see?
The warning signs, it's kind of interesting. The sponsor had this attitude of, you don't have to ask for permission, you can just ask for forgiveness later.
Okay, that normally works.
It works in some instances, but on a large project that involved a lot of stakeholders, that was probably a lot of forgiveness to be asking for later. So probably the project manager should have seen that and raised that as a risk, that these other groups would be dissatisfied. But instead, sort of like what you hinted at earlier, it's your project and you refuse to see the warning signs. You're hoping that, ignorance is bliss, that if you don't know it exists, hopefully it doesn't exist. But it was all brewing in the background.
Okay. You have 3 points, bullet points here in your paper that talk about the warning signs. If you want to go through those with us and deep a little bit dig a little bit deeper there into those 3 warning signs.
Okay, sure. So the first bullet I had was the absence of key stakeholders in meetings. So as a project manager, when we're having these project planning meetings, we recognize that the key stakeholders like IT was not in the room. So we were making decisions that involved IT for them.
Okay.
For example, that was not a good sign. And that was just one of the things that the sponsor thought he'll just ask for forgiveness later.
Okay.
The other thing was that the lack of agreement on the priorities. So it was very lopsided as business process goes. There are lots of people, lots of different groups involved in the business process, but the whole re-engineering focused on one group, basically. So it's very lopsided. Their priorities were the highest, and everybody else's was lower. So that was another, thing that we should have caught early on. And then lastly, when they had the difficult conversations, when they actually had to ask for forgiveness, those didn't happen very productively either.
Okay. And how did you then go ahead and right-size the project?
In this particular case study, what we ended up doing was, what we should have started to begin with is to get the other stakeholders in the room, listen to what their needs were, and try to plan out a next phase of the project that would take care of their needs. So that particular case study is actually an ongoing, a phased approach to this re-engineering process.
And what have you taken out of it? What are the lessons learned from this particular effort?
The lessons learned for me personally is that you have to pay attention when things don't seem right. It just because nobody is saying it, or it's not written in an email in bold and caps, doesn't mean the problem is not there. So you have to be listening for the problem, and you have to pay attention to when things seem like it's too good to be true. Oh, we have this sponsor is telling us to just go ahead and plow through and do everything. Don't worry about what other people say. That sounded too good to be true, and it was.
Mm-hmm. How difficult was it to turn this third case study actually around? Because with all the problems that you have described, it seemed like there was a lot going wrong. How hard was it to really go, okay, we have to pull this back and turn this into a different direction?
It was difficult because the stakeholders who were not involved, in the beginning, felt like basically their egos were bruised. They were left out, and they wanted to let the project team know that. So they sort of pushed their weight around at that time and refused to cooperate. So what we ended up having to do was to demonstrate that based on the business process mappings that we had done, the benefit of the project is there for everyone. So we had to sort of, take a high ground and say, look, let's work towards the greater good. We need this project, this re-engineering project has promises, improve efficiencies and so forth. And we should all collaborate and work together. So appeal to their senses.
And I assume there was a lot of one-on-one communication that needed to happen between the project team and the stakeholders that felt that they had been left out.
That's true, yes. In fact, the conversations were so grueling. Someone on the project team told me that he was worn down to a nub by the end of the conversations.
Oh my gosh.
So it was painful, but it had to happen.
Yeah. How long did it take to actually turn it around?
I think it was 3 months.
Wow, okay. All those conversations in 3 months, yes. Worn down to a nub. I think that's a very, very nice picture we have there. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So we switched the headset back to Connie. Anything you would like to add in regards to the case studies that we've just heard?
Certainly. There's just 2 things that, as Kristy was talking, came to mind. Like she said, there's a lot of similarities between any project that gets to this stage. So one thing I would just remind is keep a role for those stakeholders. They get disengaged, but if you will have something for them to do, your sponsor or your stakeholder, make sure that they know the importance of their role to your project. Even if it's just, meeting with this person or making a decision here or being a steering team member, make sure they know the importance of their role on the project. And that kind of keeps them a little bit more engaged. And the other is, we're problem solvers, right? Project managers are here to solve your problem every day. Well, the main thing with a process improvement is to ask someone, if they say this won't work, ask them, if you had to make it work, how would you do it? So if you get them engaged in the problem solving process rather than just giving them a solution, get them thinking, get them skin in the game kind of thing. That helps with process improvement as well.
Okay. We've heard many warning signs now from these 3 case studies. If you had to choose, I sent you off to an island and you're only allowed to take one of those warning signs with you. Which one is it? Which one is the number one warning signs that we project managers really have to look out for?
I think Kristy and I talked about this. It's the stakeholder engagement, the risk analysis that you're going to do around your stakeholders. Okay. Is, you've got your communication plan set up, you've got your project risk assessment done and your mitigations there. But as far as the transition and the actual use of whatever product you're delivering at the end of this project, make sure that you've sat down and eyes wide open, just like you would do requirements. You get requirements out on the table and you try to figure out everything and make that decision, like we said earlier. Do that with your stakeholders as well. Kind of do a reality check around who needs to be informed. Make sure they understand they're only informed. Who's your influencer? Make sure you know how to manage your influencer. But take the time, sit down, because your first warning sign is going to be when they don't start showing up for meetings, when they don't respond to status reports, or they don't ask anyone for a status report, or you hear that negative chatter going on. So that's one of your biggest first warning signs, we think.
Excellent. And isn't it fantastic that I have done an interview with Dr. David Hilson, the risk doctor, here at the Congress, where we talk about how to manage risk around your stakeholders. So our listeners are now encouraged to definitely listen to that interview as well, because it is going to help you avoid any of these situations that you have just heard here in these case studies. Wonderful. Excellent. So how do we apply what we have learned here on our own projects, and in particular for our listeners at home? What can they do?
So I think some of the warning signs that we list out in our paper are good, but the one thing we'd like to leave you with is, just because you've identified that warning sign in your mitigation strategy for your next project doesn't mean that same mitigation is going to work for every project thereafter. So sit down, look at the lessons that we've provided or any others that you come up with. Do a lessons learned on your project. What went right? What went wrong? How do you continue what went right? How do you fix what went wrong? And every project's a little different, so don't assume that one fix is always going to work. So you can use the ones we have. There's several others that the listeners will have from their own projects, but take those and apply them to every project. Figure out what you're going to do with them. How are you going to address them with the project you have and the team you're working with?
As project managers, we have a little bit of organizational blindness. We're in the project and everything is going great. What do you have to do to actually realize, now, wait a minute, something isn't going right here? What's the first step that I need to take to begin to assess whether or not this is going right or wrong?
Realize you're also a relationship manager. Walk around, talk to people, talk to your sponsor. It's not a status meeting where you're going to go in with your iPad or your status report and you're going to sit there and give this, okay, here's where we are on schedule and budget. It's just a conversation. How do you think it's going? What have you heard? Have you checked in on this? Have you seen that? Just have a dialogue with your key stakeholders that you've identified, your key users, your environment. You're a relationship manager, and you, as well as a project manager, so you've got to bring that whole picture together. Walk around and seek opportunities to listen.
Excellent. Connie, what have you personally taken out of doing the presentation, going through these case studies, really thinking about what went wrong in these projects?
That I'm not alone. I think that's the biggest thing. We get into these pictures like, God, it must be me. I must be doing something not right. There's got to be something that I could do better. And then you turn around and you start talking to folks and, okay, how did you handle that? And so the collaboration with Kristy and I just going through this gave me a refresher that, I'm not alone on this. It's not just me, but there are ways to make it better.
Excellent. Connie, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I do appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
And of course, Kristy, thank you also very much for your time.
Thank you, Cornelius. It's our pleasure.